Welcome to CSGuitars, the science of loud. Today we're looking at this Glarry Thinline Telecaster. I have previously looked at the Glarry Burning Fire guitar, which has a distinctly death metal aesthetic. It was fairly impressive for a budget instrument, so when Glarry reached out again, I wanted to make sure I was choosing something from the opposite end of the genre category to see if it fared as favourably. Despite not being a huge fan of traditional Telecasters, this GTL semi-hollow jumped out at me for a number of reasons. The first and most obvious is that this is inspired by Fender's Thinline Telecasters, which had chambered bodies for significant weight reduction and a distinctive F-hole in the upper curve of the instrument. This adds a certain level of complexity to the construction of such an instrument. The body needs to have large chambers routed out and a solid top glued on. To see that kind of construction on an instrument which is only $89.99 at time of writing is pretty unusual. Plus, those chambered bodies aid in the guitar resonating in a more unique way than you'll find with a standard solid body. This guitar also features a neck humbucker rather than the small covered single coil we'd usually find in this position on a Telecaster. This is clearly a nod to the larger wide range pickups that were on the original Thinlines, and although the Glarry is a normal humbucker, that's arguably more useful than either the wide range or the standard Tele neck pickup. And finally, the bridge features 6 individual brass saddles. Brass is usually a more expensive upgrade for an instrument, so it's quite unusual to see it here. Also, a Telecaster bridge usually only has 3 saddles, each of which 2 strings need to share, compromising the intonation of the instrument. So seeing 6 individual brass saddles is a very welcome surprise. There's clearly been a lot of thought put into the feature set of this instrument, and it can't have been easy to get all of these features together in the one guitar for this price point. So is this Tele an absolute bargain with the features that it has, or has the rest of the instrument suffered for their inclusion? The Thinline style construction, neck humbucker and individual brass saddles are all obviously strong points of the instrument. I'm not sure how much I'd agree with the categorization of this being semi-hollow. There's certainly a large chambered space under that F-hole, but everything else is solid. The chambering does noticeably make the instrument feel a lot lighter, and it gives a woodier response from the tone, which makes it different enough from your standard solid body. The wood being used has a handsome grain, which can be seen through the dark red transparent finish. It's appointed by a 3-ply white perloid pickguard, which adds a sense of class and gravitas to this instrument, which is quite welcome. It certainly looks the part from any distance and is quite impressive on camera. The neck pickup has a warm, smooth tone, which is contrasted in the extreme by the sharp, spanky bridge pickup, leaving the middle position to be a very usable blend of the two, so there's lots of tonal variety here. The fretboard edges are cut with a slight bevel, which is a low-budget way of trying to recreate the rolled edges that old played-in guitars are so revered for, and it greatly adds to the comfort of the instrument. The fretwork is entirely decent, they're all well seated, they're not scratchy on the strings, and the edges are done to a reasonable standard which suffices. The rest of the hardware is clean and functional, working as intended for this price point. The tuners turn smoothly enough, and once the action and the intonation have been set, the bridge works perfectly. The milled brass saddles allowing for more vibrational transfer than the pressure cast zinc equivalents, and that paired with the through-body string mounting means that this guitar is going to sustain a little bit better than it perhaps would have otherwise. As is standard for these budget instruments, a decent setup with the action and intonation set correctly right out of the box is an absolute pipe dream. A proper setup is something you can expect if you're buying from a physical store and paying twice the price or more, not something you can expect if you're buying the instrument from a website which is then shipping out from a local Amazon warehouse. If the guitar costs less than £100, you can expect to spend your first hour with it changing the strings and setting it up to play comfortably. This instrument, as expected, had very high action out of the box, but when I looked closer I realised that the problem lay with the neck. We can see that the neck isn't running parallel to the pickguard, in fact it's ramping ever so slightly forward. This probably has something to do with the fit of the neck socket, however there is a very quick and easy fix that we can employ, adding a shim to the lower edge of the socket. Fortunately, my business cards, with their subtle off-white colour and tasteful thickness, are the perfect material for a shim. 5 minutes later, and with zero extra expense, we're back to having the neck sitting parallel. A good set of strings is vital to the tuning stability and sound of the instrument, as too is getting the intonation and string height set up correctly. This setup took me less than an hour and only cost me a set of strings, but believe me when I say this turned it into an entirely different instrument. The original strings were garbage and I spent more time trying to get them to stay in tune than I did just changing them. Now the tuning stability is completely stable and the instrument is far more playable. The strings are by far the most important part of the guitar. They are your playing interface, and everything else on the instrument is simply there to support the strings, so don't skip this step. Change the strings to a good quality set from a reputable brand. As this is a Telecaster, I'll be making much use of a compressor early in the signal chain to clamp down on the sharp transients, allowing us to retain the spankiness without the painful, piercing attack of that bridge single coil. I'll also be using the comp as a saturation boost on the distorted lead sounds. I'll be throwing a vintage phaser onto some of these sounds too, as it sounds excellent with this guitar, and I've got a carbon copy in the effects loop for some delay. All of this is then going through my trusty orange rocker terror, 15 watts of classic rock excellence which really suits the Telecaster's pickup arsenal. On the subject of pickups, that bridge unit is going to give us a bright 60s spank on cleans and a fierce, slicing lead with distortion. Complementing that is the neck pickup, which gives us something thick and smooth, and as you will see, that middle position, the combination of the two is a delightful all-rounder. For all of its positive attributes, there are a few small disappointing aspects about the instrument, particularly when measured against the previous Glarry instrument I've used. Now obviously I had to shim the neck right at the start, which isn't ideal, certainly points against the instrument, but as it's something that's very easy to address, it's not the end of the world. I don't consider that to be a deal breaker. More importantly, that plastic nut sits entirely too high, causing the problem that strings fretted at the first or second fret tend to pull sharp. There is also a lot of glue residue on either side of the nut where this has been secured, which may prove problematic for getting this replaced. Now those slots could be made deeper with the correct files, or the nut replaced entirely at very little cost, but it is disappointing, especially considering the Burning Fire did not have this issue. Another slightly disappointing element was in the final surface finish of the instrument. While it's certainly been polished to a high gloss, close inspection reveals that there's still a few fine surface scratches present, which means it could have used a little more attention to detail on the final buffing stage. Now I feel like a microfiber cloth and some guitar polish will be all that it takes for me to buff these out myself, but compared to the Burning Fire, which had an impressively flawless finish, I can't help feeling just a little deflated. Continuing on the theme of could have used just a little more attention, there are some parts in the transitions of the neck where tool marks are still evident. You can kind of feel the raw wood. Again, not a deal breaker. 5 minutes with some sandpaper and a lick of finishing oil will tart that up a treat, but again, just could have been that little bit better. I think what these admittedly small issues highlight is the variances inherent in guitars that only cost 90 quid. For that sort of money, it's highly unlikely you're going to receive perfection, and we should be thankful that automation in the manufacturing process means that we can buy a guitar for this price at all. These instruments will receive very little human interaction in their final finishing setup. At this price, no one is paid to care about the fine details. So when buying a Glarry, know that there's a chance that you could receive something near perfect, as I did with the Burning Fire. But there's also the chance you could receive something that requires just a little attention from you, as I did with this Thinline Telecaster. Now, I'm absolutely certain if I'd communicated these issues back to Glarry, they would have offered to send out a replacement, as this is likely an outlier in quality. In all honesty, I don't think these things matter too much. Many of us are buying Glarry instruments specifically to hone our luthiery skills and do upgrades on, so sanding the neck and replacing a nut were things I was planning to do with this instrument anyway. Besides, this sounds very impressive for the price and plays so well that I almost feel bad about all the parts I'm going to replace in my next upgrade project. The guitar that you're getting for your money is far, far better than any of the small issues you're likely to encounter, and if you're getting this to hone your luthiery skills, then all of these little flaws are just part of the fun anyway. So that's the Glarry Thinline Telecaster. I stand by my initial impression that getting this set of features on an instrument at this price point is pretty special. And if you're accepting of the fact that these kind of instruments will need a little bit of setup from you to get them playing their best, then you're not going to have any problems. If you are interested in one of these Glarrys as an upgrade platform, as I was, then I'll be doing a follow-up video where I overhaul the entire instrument with replacement parts that are multiple times this instrument's worth, which is always a silly good time. Links for this guitar can be found in the description and pinned comment. And don't forget to click all the buttons you're supposed to make this video viable to the ever-changing whims of the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now. Keep it loud and stay safe. Feels like I'm holding nothing at all. Nothing at all. I've done that one before.